So hey, what's up everybody? We're doing this a little differently. We're doing this semi-live. I'll edit this into a video later. Say hi YouTube chat. And let's just go through all the spoilers for the entire week up until Saturday night when I'm recording this. See, look at that. Hi YouTube, let's go, right? Interactive. Alright, so Jatara. A 2/4 for 1 solar. You can Nexus solar. When you do, you can turn up to 2 solar from your Underworld to your Spirit deck. So clearly, this is a Dratagua Nexus. And it's very similar to Dratagua, right? So you can Nexus 1 to return 2. So unlike Dratagua, it's not a receive effect, which is the con. But the benefit of making this a Nexus effect means that you can trigger another receive effect and still get the recovery, as well as move spirits not to this card. So unlike Dratagua, where you're constantly loading up spirits onto Jatara, you're loading up spirits around your board to still get the proc effects, and there's some Nexus shenanigans you can pull in Solar. We'll see with the next couple of cards that actually make this card, I think, better in most ways than Dratagua, just by the fact that you don't have to load up all the spirits onto this guy to make him an easy Earthquake target or attack target and go poof, right? So I think Jatara is really good, and I think it's going to combo really well with some really cool Solar stuff. This card, Lustragon. The 7/6 for 2 solar. You can Nexus up to 3 solar. When this Lustragon receives 1 or more solar in a Nexus, you can target and destroy a card. So this is now Lakagon Nexus. So let's compare it to that again, kind of like I just compared Jatagua and Jatara, etc. So the pros to this card is that it can trigger its destruction effect itself, which both Lakagon and Latagon cannot. Latagon waits for you to cast Ambrosia or a Golden Apple, which you might not have in the moment, and Lakagon requires you to recover water spirits. I think Lustragon is better in the fact that it can trigger itself, but worse in the fact that you have to load up spirits onto it to trigger it multiple times. So if you have Lustragon and Jatara in play, and you go, let's say, Nexus 1 off Apollo to Lustragon, trigger effect, and then you go Jatara, Nexus 1 to Lustragon, trigger effect, you do have to get more things going and load up lots of spirits on Lustragon, meaning your opponent has a better chance of outing this with, say, Earthquake, or if they attack over it in some way. So, pros and cons. I think this card's going to be really powerful, though, especially if you play it with the Stadium, where you Nexus a ton to it, pop your opponent's whatever they're playing, and then attack for like 5 or 6 damage after popping their board. Other than like combo kill shenanigans, I don't know if it's going to be good enough. Put a bag of wins on this, though, and you might be cooking. Or the new artifact that we'll go into later, Golden Fleece. Also, probably a really good card to run with this, where you just get some extra spirits on board, Nexus Lustragon, maybe keep it defended, etc. Pretty solid card. Next up in Solar, we have Sundial, a 2/1 for 1 Solar. You can expend Solar in order to enchant water to your field. During your end phase, you can special ascend this Sundial to Nomad from your hand or deck if it's water enchanted. This is basically Tadpuff, but worse but better. So starting with the Tadpuff stuff, it kind of like makes you just kind of special, or you have to normal to get ready to special stuff. Like it adds water to the board. Immediately, a lot of people said Dratagua, right? It synergizes with Dratagua. I don't think it does, because the amount of solar to make this trigger over and over again makes Dratagua, the water recovery is not relevant, because you want to recover the solar as well, unless you're pairing with the Jatara, but now your deck's too clunky. But then you have the ability to special send this if you add water to it right away to Nomad, which it's kind of like the same vein of it kind of can Nimbug itself, but has more utility than a Nimbug, which I think that extra utility is relevant, especially if we get more water receivers in the future. If there's a water solar receiver, this would also be pretty good. But right now, I think it's like a weird Tadpuff that maybe if you can defend it, you can get some weird triggers off. But otherwise, you just go straight into Nomad with this card. 100%, you just go straight Nomad, move on with your day. So what's Nomad? Nomad, it's a 5/6 for solar water. You can expend solar water in order to enchant 1 solar or water from your Underworld to your field and special send the Nomad to Chron from hand or deck. So kind of going on with the Nimbug stuff again, you have to wait for your next turn to get to the 3-drop, just like Sirikun would, right? I don't know. It is better in the sense that you can hard ascend into it and then get to Chronodile, which is relevant, and it enchants 1 spirit to board, getting you hopefully closer to 6 spirits for the Chronodile defensive option, which we'll get to in a second. It also enchants to itself so that Chronodile comes in with 4, allowing you to use Chronodile's effect. All relevant. However, I don't know if a 5/6 2 cost that could get like Gorgons and you lose a ton if this get Gorgons is going to be super good to play. I think you'd rather just go like Tadpuff or Foamy into Poseidon and Chronodile so you have the spirits for Chronodile to be relevant. That's like, I think Nomadile's fine and I wouldn't be surprised to see it run. I just don't think it's going to see a ton of play because you'd rather do Poseidon shenanigans to make sure you have more kind of Aphros and Foamy and Tadpuff options over adding Nomadile, which would be inconsistent in your deck. So I think it's a cool card. I think it's a really good bridge, but I just think in water there's better ways to accelerate to Chronodile than using this bridge. So I think as a bridge effect, it's fine. You basically can just hard cast it, use its effect, you're fine. But you'd rather do other ways so you're not worrying about getting 2-drop bricks in your hand. You'd rather have a bunch of 1-drops that you can potentially ramp to Chronodile with, in my opinion. And then Chronodile. An 8/14 for 2 water, 1 solar. It's a water card now. It's not solar. Interesting note. You can disenchant 1 water from this Chronodile in order to target and destroy a card. While you have at least 6 enchanting water or solar spirits, this Chronodile cannot be targeted by an opponent's card effects. That's a doozy. Alright, so let's start with the stats. 8/14, it's kind of like, you're not attacking with this consistently because like there's so many cards that just go cool. Like any 5 attacker plus Zeus or Demeter can crash over this. So playing this in attack position is actually kind of scary because your opponent can answer this in attack position pretty easily. Unless you're playing a stadium because you want to get spirits on board. 14 defense is cracked. That's a lot of defense. Nothing beating over that unless you're playing Pantera exactly. But how are you getting Pantera out to a defense position Elestral? The stats are fine. Disenchanting 1 water from this Chronodile to target destroy card. So it's Centarbor, right? You disenchant from it to Centarbor pop. It's bridge. If you bridge it, will give you 1 extra spirit on board. If you Poseidon to special this, you might also have extra spirits to load onto it. And you do play this with Poseidon because Poseidon will fuel this every turn. You go Poseidon effect to Chronodile, Chronodile effect to pop. Over and over and over again, as long as you try to keep the protection on board. And the protection's like Voltempest, right? It can't be targeted by opponent's card effects. It's Voltempest plus Centarbor with the casting of, like, it's as easy to get out as Voltempest. So this is Water Centarbor with Voltempest protection, which it all works to be like, this is threatening. But then if also your opponent might just play like Pigas the Poseidon might be the new meme. You Pigas Poseidon. Chronodile is targetable now. Earthquake it. Thunderstorm Chronodile, right? Like Thunderstorm Poseidon. Like if your opponent's loading up spirits on board, they are asking to be outed and to hurt real bad doing it. So the pros and cons are there. I do think it's an amazing 3-drop, and I do think it's going to see a ton of play because it is difficult to out without using multiple cards, but you have to use multiple cards to get it into play. Additionally, before I pass on this card, I want to talk about, a lot of people are like, oh, you just play this in the Locagon deck as like a one-of instead. I don't think you can play this in Locagon unless you're playing specifically Water Nexus, because it wants lots of spirits on board, and I think you guys have seen in the past where a lot of like Nexus decks load up spirits on boards, and all of a sudden you don't have the spirits in Underworld to recover with Ambrosia and stuff. So I think that gums up its strategy to say, oh, I'll play with Locagon and play this control stall water deck with Chronodile and Locagon. But I do think it's great with Jurtagua, with Foamy, with the normal water stall stuff, but instead of Locagon. I think they play 2 separate decks. You play either water stall Locagon or you play like water ramp Chronodile now. Water ramp is looking pretty solid with this card. We'll see what comes out in the set to help with it more. So let's go into Sobell, right? Sobell, so 1/4 for 1 solar. While you foretell, you may special ascend this Sobell to a foretold soul stocks. Your Apollo's effect that foretell cards reveal an additional 2 cards. So, okay, starting off with the Apollo's effect that foretell cards. Apollo will foretell 3. We'll get to Apollo later. So this makes Apollo foretell 5. You get to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and look at them, reveal them to your opponent. Unfortunately, you have to reveal them to your opponent so your opponent knows what you're looking at. But you get to order the top 5 cards of your deck in any way you want. That's really good. And then if you find a way to like draw a card and shuffle the rest back, you're basically brainstorming magic. Like, that's a really good effect. Now, the foretell, while you foretell, you may special ascend to a foretold soul stocks. And you're digging 5 deep. So if you go Sobell, Apollo, foretell, find soul stocks, next chain special into soul stocks, re-enchant to Apollo, and then start popping cards, that's really good. So let's go into, like, Sobell. But soul stocks? Hello? 4/7 for 2 solar. When you special cast it, normally off a Sobell, but you can also trigger it off Rise From. Enchant 2 solar from your underworld to your field. You can disenchant solar from your Apollo to target and destroy a card. So, destroy anything on board for 1 off Apollo. Pretty good there. If that was just the card would be fine with the Sobell Quick Ascend. But additionally, when you special cast it, you can get 2 solar from your underworld to board. If your opponent's low on spirits or low on cards on board, and you can just go enchant 2 to soul stocks, pop your defender, and punch for 4, that's scary. Plays with Stadium, and now it has 11 stats too, so your opponent, like, this card is scary. And the fact that it just can come out on turn 1 if you get a little lucky, like, and then you play First Light to put on top of your deck, and then you Sobell it, and you pop it in play and go pop that, punch you in the face for 4. It's really strong. I think Soul Stocks is gonna, like, Sobell is whatever. Sobell is like cool and fun and interesting. Soul Stocks makes the cow deck actually this crazy relevant, almost aggro threat if you compare it with enough other solar cards. But even then, maybe play like Solar Earth and play like Viserys on the side. There's so much you can do with this, and I just think Soul Stocks is cracked. I think Soul Stocks is, and it's uncommon. It's uncommon. Like, it's uncommon. This card is crazy. I think cows are legitimately going to be crazy powerful. If not top tier, they're going to be easily tier 2, and they're going to be a deck that says checkmate. Like, pop your card, tech 4. Like, it's going to do so much. I think Soul Stocks is crazy. Oh, man, I love this card. I think cow deck is great. But yeah, Soul Stocks scares me. Sobell not so much. Corva Shine, 2/4 for 1 solar. Card effects can get a little complicated here, but when this Corva Shine receives 1 or more solar, you can foretell cards equal to the number of spirits enchanting it plus 1. Then you may draw a card and put a card from your hand on top of your deck. At its basis, when you play this card, you can look at the top of your of your deck. You can choose to draw it and then put 1 card from your hand on top of your deck. Think of it like Comagma. You add a card and then you put a card back on top of your deck at its basis. But if you can nexus multiple spirits to it, you can look at, say, the top 3 cards of your deck, put them back on top of your deck, grab a card from those 3 that you want, drawing it, and then put a card back on top of your deck, and then perhaps find a way to shuffle, maybe drop some Fleece to get rid of the cards you don't want from that top 3 pile. That's really, really good. And you combine this with Jotara, you have 2 defensive bodies that let you kind of look at the top of your deck, add 1, mix around the top of your deck so your opponent doesn't know quite what you're doing, and almost use it like an extra hand. That's really cool. I think Corva Shine, with the Nexus stuff we've seen in Solar so far, actually might be cooking. But I also can see how this doesn't get played at all because it's a little clunky where it doesn't get you card advantage, it just lets you trade cards. So we'll have to see, but I do think there's a world where with Jotara, Lustragon, and maybe other stuff in the future, or like Circle the Sky, Altar, that there might be a Solar Nexus deck that just likes to manipulate the top of his deck, recover a little bit, and pop cards while it's doing it. So I think Corva Shine might shine, pun intended. Oh boy, I don't know what to think about this card. So Cypher Maul, it's a 4/1 for 1 solar. When you cast this Cypher Maul, you can search your deck for a Golden Fleece and cast it, empowering this Cypher Maul. Spirits from your spirit deck or underworld or can be used to cast Golden Fleece. So first off, this is great because it says your artifact is free. Normally artifacts are extremely expensive, right? Like putting 2 spirits to cast an artifact is awkward. But the fact that you can use your underworld spirits, so if you go like Nog into Cypher Maul, you're basically casting a free Golden Fleece. Golden Fleece says the Cypher Maul is not going to get destroyed at least once. So playing Cypher Maul turn 1 is pretty safe at saying I'm leaving this on board for a turn, allowing Solar Nexus, or not Solar Nexus, sorry, Solar Ascension stuff to potentially do better, right? So I think Cypher Maul has a world where it plays in a defensive Nexus Ascension deck for Solar, especially with Lestragon, where you can play Cypher Maul. It's pretty safe. They have to get rid of 2 cards to beat over it, even though it's only going to be a 4-1, 4-3 with Golden Fleece when we get there. But it brings a Nexus bank with it. It brings protection with it. I think those are really relevant. Those are extremely relevant. Those are extremely relevant. Bringing protection and a Nexus bank in an element where we already see lots of Nexus cards that look playable is going to be super relevant. So if this gets played, it's probably going to be in a Solar Nexus deck or a Solar Artifact deck when we get into those cards in a moment. The Solar Artifact stuff and just Artifact stuff in general in Daybreak is looking interesting. So a Nexus card or an Artifact deck card, we'll have to wait and see, but I think it has possibilities for both to be pretty relevant. Alright, next up, Apollo. 1 cost Divine Rune for Solar, as are all the Divine Runes. The Divine Rune text, you can add 3 Solar to it when you cast it. Straightforward there. You can disenchant Solar from this Apollo in order to foretell 3 and add up to 1 Solar Celestial foretold this way to your hand. So this is basically look at top 3, probably add 1 card to your hand, and order the top of your cards, etc. Apollo I don't think is that strong, except in the decks that it's really strong in. Right, so we see it in cows, right? This is going to be key in cows. Apollo plus cow deck. I keep saying cow deck. Man, cow deck is hilarious, but I think it's actually legitimately good. It'll be a staple card. It'll be great. Any deck that wants to foretell, if we get more foretell triggers, Apollo will be fantastic in. The downside is Apollo's not super splashable in other elements, kind of like how Aeolus is only in wind, Keone only cares about frost. Apollo really only cares about solar. In a solar deck, this card is basically just look at top 3, add 1. It's Ash Rabbit every turn. Which, you know, playing this 1 cost, disenchanting it right away, Ash Rabbiting for a solar thing is good enough. Honestly, I think that's good enough in a solar deck. It just has to be played in solar deck. But with the foretell shenanigans we see with the cows already, I think Apollo is really strong. But only in solar decks. Maybe not even all solar decks, maybe just solar Nexus stuff and cows. Like, I don't know how much we're going to play it outside of those decks, because that's clearly what it's going to be decent in. Going forward, we'll have to see what other solar stuff drops to see other relevant cards, perhaps. But right now, I think it's good in solar and terrible in everything else. You don't want to use that effect unless you're adding something. Next up, Golden Fleece. We just talked about this with Cypher Maul. Golden Fleece, 2-cost artifact. The Empowered Celestial gets 2 defense. If the Empowered Celestial would be destroyed in battle or by an opponent's card effect, you may destroy this Golden Fleece instead. This is basically Bag of Winds, but better but worse. So the better part about this compared to Bag of Winds is it prevents any destruction, not basically just invoke destruction or counter removal. It prevents any destruction. So imagine if your opponent goes Poison Tipped Arrow and you go Golden Fleece. Do they want to expand to pop your Golden Fleece, or are they going to let it go? Like, or you play Golden Fleece on like something that you want to defend and they can't destroy it, right? Golden Fleece, I think, is really, really powerful. I think it's a really, really good artifact rune. Even if you go like Argo, Golden Fleece protects something is also potentially very relevant. So we'll have to see where it goes. I think it's going to be a really powerful artifact because there's a lot of shenanigans to do. It just says deal with my artifact first, then deal with my Elestral, especially if you throw it on something that already has protection. Like, imagine you throwing this on your Chronodial, right? And now your Chronodial's got 3 spirits on it. Golden Fleece is 2 more, plus 1 more spirit. And now they have to go through Golden Fleece and Chronodial's protection effect. I think Golden Fleece is going to be really, really powerful. It really is going to be strong. Temple of the Sun. Skip. Guardian of the Fleece. So if artifact decks become a thing, this is why. Guardian of the Fleece. 2-cost counter rune. This Guardian of the Fleece can only be cast when an opponent activates a card effect that targets an artifact or Empowered Celestial on your field. Negate the effect, then destroy a card that opponent's field. Not the card that's targeting it. Any card you want. This is just destroy whatever you want when you trigger this. However, What balances this is the fact that you have to load up, you have to get an artifact on board, which is easy enough, but you need to basically use this to protect a 2-card Ton of Spirit combo, so it is expensive. It's not expensive on its surface value, but the cards you need to get into play to play this effectively, I think make this actually as powerful as negating an effect and then destroying something else that you want to is crazy power. Like, that's probably the strongest effect in Elestrals right now. I don't know if the requirements of needing artifact on something and then to target the artifact of that Elestral is good enough or consistent enough or cheap enough to make this work. Because you have to get the artifacts on board and get this face down. And artifacts, like, and then what happens if your opponent just says, cool, I play Valkyries, buff it with a hammer and attack anyway and destroy something? Like, this card, don't get me wrong, is powerful, but I think people are going to overestimate how powerful it might be just because there's a lot going on to get this card to work, and you also still need to draw it. So if you're using this over, like, Gorgons, it's a little bit more restrictive on what it's used for. But it's cool that artifacts are getting support that is really powerful, that might make artifacts actually viable as a deck archetype, even with how expensive artifacts can be. Like solar earth artifacts, or solar earth fire artifacts for Hephaestus to find stuff with like Cynectar and Wasp Ivy. Could be, like, you play Wasp Ivy with like Golden Fleece and then Guardian Fleece face down, you basically win the game. So I do think there's great ways to make this really strong. I just don't know how strong it will be. Poison Tunic. 2 of anything. Artifact. The Empowered Elestral gets -2 attack. When the Empowered Elestral is destroyed in battle, the controller must expend 2. So now we have a way to, in one turn, play Cyanectar, Poison Tunic, Wasp Ivy, punch over the thing with Wasp Ivy, and burn our opponents for a ton. That's really powerful. Combined with Argo, which is the next card, this card is going to be really good. Now, do you play it without Wasp Ivy? I don't think so. I don't think it's good enough to play without specifically Wasp Ivy and Cyanectar. I think you have to play it in that deck because the -2 attack for 2 cost and the potential to burn while you still have to crash over something isn't good enough. But if you have something that can't get in chained to by counter runes to play Poison Tunic to then beat over it, that's really powerful. You can Argo with it. So maybe you play as a one of in like an Argo deck or an artifact deck. I could see that perfectly fine. It's kind of got the Necklace of Harmonia shenanigans going on where you want to empower your opponent with it and then do shenanigans. I think the card's really good, but it definitely makes Wasp Ivy from a meme deck to an actually viable deck with the amount of ways to get Poison Tunic out. So you have Rummagem to search Cynectars, you have Hephaestus and Argo to get this out, making the deck probably consistent enough to just be this aggressive Earth deck. But watch out, your Wasp Ivy can still get Earthquaked and other shenanigans, Kidleos, Boombat, etc. So there's still outs of Wasp Ivy, but this is a pretty devastating turn to start with where you just go perhaps something pass and they go Cynectar, Poison Tunic, punch over, deal a bunch of damage. I'm unaffected by counter runes pass. So it's going to be good. How good is the question? We'll see that when the rest of the set comes out. And Argo, I keep talking about Argo. Argo's a 2-cost counter rune. This Argo can only be cast after an Elestral declares an attack. Cast an artifact rune from your hand or deck. So this is a 2-cost counter rune. It's not a 2-cost counter. This costs 4 because you have to cast the artifact from your deck. But this is really cool because if your opponent goes, I'm attacking your Urseer, and you go, Argo, Necklace of Harmonia, my Urseer is bigger than your thing, pop your thing, special another bear into play, bears meta? Maybe. But in reality, like, you play this in Cynectar decks, you play this in potential solar artifact decks, which might be relevant. We have to see what the solar artifact does still. But even if you play this in like Earth Solar, I keep saying Earth Solar artifacts because I think Scythe of Demeter plus Argo is a really good way to refund the Argo cost as well as battle trick your opponent. So I think Earth with Sprouter, Argo, etc. is going to make an artifact deck. Combined with Guardian of the Fleece, I think that's a really interesting artifact kind of control surprise deck that you could run. You splash fire in there for Hephaestus as well. Hephaestus actually good now, perhaps? The real question, I guess, comes down to how many artifacts do you run in your deck? because they're kind of bricks in hand, so you don't want to run like one of every artifact. You have to pick and choose. So you probably run Golden Fleece, maybe Scythe, maybe Trident, as a bunch of one-ofs, but then if they get destroyed, you can't do it again. So that's the toss-up with Argo. However, Argo does enable a lot of janky combat shenanigans that I think is really cool, and Elestrals is missing as far as stat buffs. Like, think Rush Recklessly in Yu-Gi-Oh! This kind of does that. Again, though, Argo is really expensive. It costs 2 plus the artifact cost. And you could potentially get this chains or like Lava List beforehand. So the fact that it can only be cast in a battle makes this a little bit weak. But I think it's actually a strong card for everything I just said, obviously. Alright, Earth stuff now. Mudlet. A 1 cost 3/3. When this Mudlet receives 1 or more Earth, you can change the position of an Elestral. Position effects do not target. Relevant for Chronodile, relevant for Voltempest, relevant for anything that is immune to targeting. This is basically Sorlet on, well, it's an Earth Sorlet Nexus, right? So Altar makes this go crazy. Circle of Sky can make this go crazy. The new Counter Root in Earth makes this really good. So I think this is a really good defensive tool in Earth for an Earth control deck. And I say Earth control because it combines this with Panzer, combines with Ecolinks, and even Centarbor, where you go play Mudlet, you play Altars, you play Earth Nexus. This is a perfect Earth Nexus receiver. You can use this offensively or defensively. It's really good. You just go defensively, Altar, put your thing into defense, put 2 of your things in defense. How about that? Offensively, you play Mudlet, turn those to attack positions so I can beat over your Ash Rabbit. Hey, let's circle the Mudlet. Let's do it again. So, as an offensive defensive receiver, I think this really makes Earth Nexus a viable deck. You see some of it with legs in Frostfall set 2, but in set 3, I think this alone makes a Centarbor deck viable. And I think this alone, and there's even one more card that goes in that deck. So we'll get to that card in a moment. Let's go into the Ascension. Kbor, a 7/5 for 2 Earth. You can expend 2 Earth in order to target an opponent's Elestral, suppress that Elestral, and destroy it. Earthquake got legs. This is literally a better Earthquake on a body. Is that good enough? Probably. Okay, so let's look at the downsides first. It's an order to, so it's a cost, which means you can pay cost only to get Gorgons, and then maybe your opponent answers it after the fact. Second downside, it's an Earth 2-drop, which means you have to ascend into it, so you have to either do Rise From shenanigans or have defensive bodies on board to get into this. Earth Ascensions outside of Lotagon aren't seeing a ton of play, even though there's some decent ones, like Sakursor I think is decent enough to see play. It just, Gigaflora is also really powerful, really hard to get out. So I don't know how good a Earth 2-drop will be, but this is a good effect. The ability to Earthquake your opponent is powerful. However, you're going to have to get through your opponent's Shield of Achilles with this, and that's probably not happening. I think this is like a control Earth card. You sit in attack position, every turn threaten to pop stuff, almost like Trifernal threatens to pop stuff. Imperial. Yeah, you know what? This is a 2-cost Imperial. Does that make it good? Makes it alright, right? Really powerful effect. Difficult to get a 2-drop to stick on board. So I think this is a good card. The fact that it allows you to just enter board Earthquake is always good, but getting it on board makes it a brick in your hand until you can actually ascend into it. So I think it's good, not great. We'll have to see what Earth can do with it, though. Moving on. Bloom. A 1-cost counter rune. Nexus 1 Earth. If you do, you may enchant Earth to an Elestral on your field. So Nexus 1 Earth, so we're going to trigger our Mudlet that we just talked about. Earth receivers. Is that the only Earth receiver that's relevant? Is that the only Earth receiver? Oh, and Clovey. Right, Clovey's on the card. You're playing Clovey. So Clovey's relevant. This is, with Clovey, a 1-cost draw 2. So Earth Nexus on the board, right? Nexus Earth, if you do, enchant Earth to in a field. So this is if you do, which means it happens in one chain. Yeah, Clovey's on that card art. Chat's calling me out. I mentally brain farted here. But if you do, so it all happens one chain. You can use this to make your Mudlet super defensive, right? You play Bloom. Mudlet, to put 2 things in defense. This basically tsunamis your opponent's board with a Mudlet. With Clovey, if your Clovey sticks board, maybe you have a Foley on board as well. You go, cool, Clovey's now 7 defense, and I draw 2 more cards. Earth Nexus has legs, and then on your following turn, you go plop Centaur into play over it. I think legitimately Earth Nexus Centaur might be like meta relevant now with cards like Bloom, cards like Mudlet to make Earth Nexus really have legs. So I do really like Bloom. I think it's a really simple design that's really powerful to do a lot of things. And as we see more Earth receivers down the line in the future, this only gets better. We'll just have to see if there's more ways to get Earth spirits on board, because Earth does struggle outside of Demeter at getting spirits on board and getting a lot of cards officially on board to ascend into things. So we'll see where that goes. But Bloom, powerful, and it only gets better in the future. Veruka, a 3-1 for 1 wind. When this attacking Veruka enters the battle with an attack position Elestral that has equal or fewer enchanting spirits, you can suppress the Elestral and destroy it. If you do, this Veruka deals no damage to this battle. So, okay, this kills any 1-drop in attack position, so it does the Veruka thing without being, I think this is a fixed Veruka, right? Because it has to have 1 spirit to destroy 1 spirit Elestral, 2 spirits to destroy a 2 or 1, or 3 spirits on destroy a 3, 2, or 1. So you're required to match the spirits of the Elestral in attack position to destroy it, which Wind does have a Nexus deck. So if you play this in Wind Nexus as a tech piece against like Chronodile perhaps, or other 2 or 3 drop decks, this might be pretty relevant. Additionally, this does need to attack itself to trigger the effect. It doesn't have the Veruka shenanigans like I go Spinasect into your Veruka, oops, my Spinasect dies. So this does need to declare the attack, meaning it's kind of just a 3-1 on board. I think the best comparison to this card is actually Warmite, where yes, it will destroy that thing this turn, but next turn you just go anything, crash over it. So, I think it's fine. I think there's ways to make it work. But at most, it's going to be like a one-of-and-win toolbox. Maybe a sideboard card against, I don't even know what, like Morfrost or Water Foamy shenanigans. I really don't know. It's all right. I think it basically is a Wind Warmite with extra steps or less steps, plus side downside. Next up, Javal Luan, a 6/4 for 2 wind. When this Javal Luan destroys an opponent's attack position Celestial in battle, that opponent must expend 3. This is Javalantis, but probably better. The fact that it's in Wind is already getting lots of spirits on board, but then you go Javal Luan. Like, if you go any Wind 1-drop, let's say Nemisail because it's expensive. You go Nemisail, you go Tower of Winds to Javal Luan. It's got 3 wind on it now. As you attack over something with attack position, you can do 5 damage with this card really fast. So I think this card is going to make a potential wind aggro thing possibly happen. But is it good enough to make that deck happen? I don't know. But wind aggro with Javal Luan might be relevant because you can go like wind burn stuff. And after you do your wind burn Nexus shenanigans, follow up with like Helios, Chairride, Javal Luan, punch for a million more. I think that's really cool. I think if you play Helios in like a wind Nexus burn deck, this could be a really fun like high-end Nexus strategy card. Other than that, it's going to see no play. If it sees any play, it's going to be in this aggro wind Nexus deck. It has to be. I don't see any other way. Moving on, Toxin Swarm. It's Toxan in Wind. Better than Toxan in Wind probably. Like in Wind, Wind has other burn cards. Wind had Nexus cards that burn. I think Toxin Swarm is better in Wind than it is in Thunder. And Toxan's already good. So I think this will see a lot of play in Wind Nexus burn, maybe Wind Ascension with like going into Flammoth. This is fine to go like Tower of Winds into Flammoth, burn them for 2 and then ascend. So I think there's some really cool shenanigans you do as long as you get your Nexus triggers off with this card. This will generally be like a kill on sight card against Wind, and they can search it with Aeolus. So it's consistent. I think it's really good. And lastly, Cyclo Venom, a 6/2 for 2 wind. When the Cyclo Venom destroys an Celestial in battle, you can special cast a Toxin Swarm from your hand or deck. So it's Capricorn and Wind. So the fact that it has to destroy something to get its trigger, and it might not even connect, which is the issue with a lot of, like, maybe in Wind, Fire, Burn, where you have Chains of Prometheus ready to go, but having to ascend into it, and it's a Wind 2-drop in Wind, Fire, Burn, I don't see this seeing play. I think you can make a fun theme deck with it, where you're doing the Toxic Swarm stuff, but I don't think this is good enough to see play at all. I think this might be a really bad card, just because, again, it's like Capricorn sees like no play. It basically is like Capricorn but worse. It is Capricorn but worse, and Capricorn sees no play. So I don't think this is going to see play. I think it's just a fun card to talk about. It's really cool and thematic for sure, but I don't think it's good. Alright, so that is the end of this little video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you're on stream, say, well, can't say on YouTube because no one sees your chat right now. But yeah, that's the end of this video. Thanks for coming to my stream, all you guys. And that is the Daybreak spoilers for this week. I'll see you guys in the next one.